The restaurant was softly lit, with warm yellow lights and the quiet hum of evening chatter. A gentle tune played in the background, and waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying plates that smelled of comfort and luxury. In the corner near the window, a young man named Daniel sat nervously, tapping his fingers against the edge of his water glass. His friend had set up this blind date, insisting he needed to meet someone real, someone with a good heart. Daniel wasn't sure what to expect. He had been on a few blind dates before, and most ended the same way. Awkward silences, polite smiles, and a promise to stay in touch that never happened. But tonight felt different somehow. He had dressed neatly, combed his hair twice, and even arrived 15 minutes early. There was a small part of him that hoped maybe, just maybe, this could be something special. He checked his watch for the third time. The table across from him was still empty. He tried to act calm, but inside he was restless. He took a sip of water and glanced at the entrance, wondering what kind of woman would walk through those doors. His friend hadn't told him much, just that her name was Lila, that she was kind and confident, and that Daniel should not overthink things. When the door opened, a cool breeze followed someone inside. He saw a woman pause for a moment, scanning the room with calm eyes. She was graceful and well-dressed, wearing a light blue blouse and dark jeans. But what caught Daniel's attention wasn't her clothes or her smile. It was the wheelchair she moved in. For a split second, his heart skipped. He hadn't expected that. His friend hadn't mentioned it. He blinked, unsure how to react, and quickly looked down at the table, pretending to check his phone. His thoughts tangled with confusion. Should he stand? Should he help her? Would that seem rude? His palms began to sweat as she moved closer. When she reached his table, she smiled gently and said, "Hi, you must be Daniel?" Her voice was calm, confident, and warm. Daniel stood a little too quickly, knocking his napkin to the floor. "Oh, yes, hi, sorry," he stammered, bending to pick it up. His face turned slightly red. He could tell she noticed, but she smiled again, not making a big deal out of it. "It's all right," she said softly. "First meetings are always a little awkward." He laughed nervously. "Yeah, I guess so." "Please, have a seat," she chuckled lightly. "I already do." Daniel froze for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. "Right, of course, sorry." The waiter arrived with menus, saving him for a moment. Daniel tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting. He felt guilty for being surprised, and even more guilty for feeling nervous. He told himself to relax, to act normal, but his thoughts were louder than his words. Lila looked at the menu with interest. "This place has great food," she said. "I've been here before for business dinners." "Business?" he asked. "Yes," she replied casually. "I work in the tech industry. I manage a small company downtown." "That sounds impressive," Daniel said. "So you're a manager?" She smiled faintly. "Something like that." Daniel tried to smile back, but his eyes dropped again to the wheelchair. He didn't mean to stare, but his curiosity kept sneaking through. Lila noticed, though she didn't say anything. Instead, she kept the conversation light, asking about his job, his hobbies, his family. He worked in marketing, he said. He liked photography, reading on weekends, and sometimes went hiking with friends. As he spoke, Lila listened attentively, nodding, occasionally laughing at his small jokes. But Daniel could sense a wall between them, one that he had built without realizing it. At one point, the waiter brought bread to the table. Lila reached forward to get it herself, but Daniel quickly stood up. "Here, let me help you," he said too fast, grabbing the basket. She paused. "It's fine, I can..." But Daniel had already placed it near her plate. She forced a polite smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. He sat down, pretending not to notice the slight change in her tone. He thought he was being kind, but to her it felt like another reminder that people saw her chair before they saw her. She looked out the window for a moment, breathing slowly before turning back. "So," she said, trying to shift the mood. "What made you agree to a blind date?" Daniel laughed awkwardly. "I guess I just haven't had much luck meeting the right person. My friend thought this might help." "Do you believe in love at first sight?" she asked, her eyes curious but calm. He hesitated. I believe in connection. Sometimes it happens fast, sometimes it takes time." Lila smiled faintly. "Good answer." They both laughed lightly, and for a brief moment the tension faded. The conversation began to flow more easily. They talked about favorite movies, childhood memories, and how both of them hated loud restaurants. Daniel started to relax, realizing that Lila was easy to talk to, smart, funny, and grounded. But then, just as things were warming up, the waiter accidentally spilled a small glass of water on the table. The water spread quickly, dripping near Lila's lap. Daniel jumped up immediately, flustered. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Let me fix that." He grabbed several napkins and leaned across the table, his movements quick and clumsy. "It's okay," Lila said calmly. "It's just water." But Daniel didn't stop. He panicked, trying to dry the table, bumping the bread basket, nearly knocking over another glass. People at the nearby table turned to look. Lila's cheeks turned pink, not from anger, but from quiet embarrassment. She wanted to tell him to sit down, but she didn't want to make a scene. Finally, the waiter returned with a towel, apologizing. Daniel sat back down, his face pale. "I'm so sorry," he said again. Lila gave a polite smile. "It's fine, really," but inside she felt a small sting. Not because of the water, but because she could tell he didn't see her as just another woman. He saw her as fragile, different, someone to handle carefully. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that. They continued dinner, but the easy rhythm they had found earlier was gone. The conversation grew slower, heavier. Daniel tried to keep it going, asking random questions, but his voice carried a nervous edge. When dessert came, Lila barely touched hers. She smiled when he spoke, but her eyes drifted elsewhere, thoughtful and distant. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of moments like this, of people meaning well but not knowing how to simply see her as a person. After a long silence, she looked at him and said gently, "Daniel, you don't have to try so hard." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said softly, "you don't have to treat me differently. I've been through worse dinners than spilled water." Her tone wasn't harsh, it was almost kind. But the words hit him deeply. He looked down, realizing how foolish he must have seemed. He wanted to explain himself, to tell her he didn't mean to offend, but the words tangled on his tongue. I just wanted to make you comfortable," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but comfort comes from honesty, not caution." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding her more than before, but not knowing how to fix what was broken. The evening came to a soft close. The waiter brought the bill, and Daniel insisted on paying, though she offered to split it. As they left the restaurant, the air outside was cool, filled with city sounds, the hum of cars, the faint chatter of people passing by. Daniel walked beside her as she wheeled toward the parking lot. "Can I walk you to your car?" he asked. "That's kind of you," she said, "but I'll be fine." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she replied, smiling politely. "Thank you for tonight." He wanted to say something more, something real, but the moment had already passed. She gave a small nod and began moving toward her car. He watched her go, the faint sound of her wheels on the pavement echoing in his chest. As she disappeared around the corner, Daniel stood under the streetlight, feeling both ashamed and sad. He had wanted to make a good impression, to seem genuine, but all he could think about now was how wrong the night had gone. He sighed, pulling his coat tighter around him. Then he whispered to himself, she deserved better than that. What he didn't know was that Lila, sitting quietly in her car, whispered almost the same thing. He seemed kind, just not ready to see. She stared at the city lights for a moment, then drove away into the night, her expression unreadable but calm. Neither of them knew that this awkward evening would soon lead to something far more unexpected. A chance to see each other, truly, for who they were. 2 days passed after that uneasy dinner, but the evening kept replaying in Daniel's mind like a broken record. He sat at his small apartment desk staring at his laptop, but the words on the screen made no sense. His thoughts were stuck on that one moment, her calm face, her soft tone, and the quiet disappointment behind her eyes when she said, "Comfort comes from honesty, not caution." He hadn't meant to hurt her. He truly hadn't. He'd gone in with the best of intentions, nervous, yes, but hopeful. Yet somehow everything he did came out wrong. Every time he tried to show care, it ended up looking like pity. Every time he wanted to be polite, it turned into distance. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. "You're an idiot," he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his friend, the one who had set him up. So, how was the date? Daniel stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Awkward. I messed up." A few seconds later, his friend replied, "What happened?" "It's hard to explain," Daniel typed. She was great, really smart, calm, confident. But I wasn't ready. I said and did the wrong things. There was a pause. Then another message came. You're being too hard on yourself. Just apologize, maybe? People appreciate honesty. Daniel stared at that last sentence, unsure if it would help. Wouldn't an apology just make it worse? Maybe she'd already forgotten the night and moved on. He didn't want to sound like he was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. He decided not to text her. Not yet. The next few days were quiet. He went to work, had coffee, sat through meetings, but everything felt dull. He didn't know why this one dinner bothered him so much. Maybe because for the first time in a long while, he had actually cared what someone thought of him. Meanwhile, across town, Lila was sitting in her office surrounded by stacks of documents and glowing computer screens. Her office had tall windows overlooking the city skyline, the kind of view most people dreamed of. But tonight, even the lights of the city couldn't distract her from her thoughts. The dinner had stayed in her mind too. She didn't blame Daniel. She had seen that kind of reaction before. People often froze or overcompensated when they saw her wheelchair. Some were uncomfortable, others overly kind, and a few simply left. Daniel, she could tell, wasn't cruel or dismissive. He was just unsure. Still, it hurt a little more than she wanted to admit. Her assistant knocked lightly on the door. Lila, you've been working since morning. Maybe take a break? Lila smiled. I'm fine, thank you. Are you sure? Yes, she said softly. Just a few more emails. When the door closed, she stared at her computer for a moment longer, then sighed and leaned back. She didn't want to think about that night anymore, but a small voice in her head whispered that maybe Daniel wasn't a bad person, just someone who hadn't learned how to see beyond what was in front of him. By the weekend, life had almost returned to normal, until an unexpected call changed everything. Daniel's company had been struggling with a client project for weeks. Their director announced an urgent meeting for Monday morning. We've got a chance to pitch to a new investor, the director said. A tech firm that could save our entire quarter. Everyone cheered except Daniel, who just nodded. He didn't care much about the name of the company. They'd done so many proposals lately it all blurred together. Monday came faster than he expected. He arrived early wearing his best suit, trying to look sharp and focused. The conference room buzzed with quiet excitement. Their boss stood near the projector preparing slides. A few minutes later, the door opened. The room fell silent, and there she was. Lila. Her expression was calm, professional, unreadable. She rolled gracefully into the room, her assistant following with a folder of documents. The same soft blue in her blouse as that night, but this time she looked completely different. Powerful, confident, in control. Daniel froze. His heart skipped. His hands grew cold. Their eyes met for just a second. There was no surprise on her face, no anger either. Just a polite acknowledgement like she was greeting any other business partner. Good morning, she said, her voice even. I'm glad to finally meet your team. I've heard good things about your company. Daniel's boss smiled eagerly. The pleasure is ours, Miss Lila. We're honored to have you here. The meeting began. Lila listened attentively as slides changed and numbers filled the screen. Daniel tried to focus, but his mind was a storm. Every time he glanced her way, he saw flashes of that awkward dinner, the spilled water, his nervous laughter, her quiet disappointment. When it came time for him to present his section, he stood up, cleared his throat, and began speaking. His voice trembled slightly at first, but he pushed through. He explained marketing plans, potential strategies, and how the partnership could benefit both companies. Lila listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. Her expression remained neutral, though once or twice. Daniel thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a quiet reminder that she knew exactly who he was. When the presentation ended, there was a brief silence. Then Lila smiled politely. Thank you, she said. It's clear you've all worked hard. I'd like to review a few details with your director if possible. The team nodded. As everyone gathered their papers, Daniel's boss gestured for him to wait outside for a moment. Daniel stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breath. He wanted to vanish. What were the odds of this happening? The woman whose date he ruined was now sitting across from his boss, deciding whether or not to invest in his company. A few minutes later, the door opened, and people began to leave the room. Lila stayed behind, finishing a quick call on her phone. When she finally looked up, her eyes met Daniel's again. He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Hi," he said softly. "Hello, Daniel," she replied, her tone calm. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said awkwardly. "Neither did I," she said. "But life has a sense of humor, doesn't it?" He gave a small, nervous laugh. "I guess it does." There was a brief pause. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was heavy, but not cold. "About the other night," Daniel began. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I handled everything wrong. I was nervous, and I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable." Lila studied his face quietly. "I know you didn't mean harm," she said. "You were kind, just uncertain." He nodded, ashamed. "I was. And I've been thinking about it since then. You deserved a better first impression." Her eyes softened slightly. "It's in the past now. Let's not mix personal moments with business." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just needed to say it." She gave a small nod. "Apology accepted." Before he could say more, her assistant called her, reminding her of another meeting. She smiled politely and wheeled past him, leaving behind a faint scent of her perfume and a mix of emotions Daniel couldn't quite name. When she was gone, he sat down in the empty hallway, feeling like the world had just turned upside down. That night he couldn't sleep. He replayed every word of their short conversation, trying to read her tone, her eyes, her silence. Did she really forgive him, or was she just being polite? He didn't know. But one thing had changed. He didn't see her as the woman in the wheelchair anymore. He saw her as a person who carried herself with quiet strength, who had the grace to forgive even when she had every reason not to. Meanwhile, Lila sat by her window at home, looking at the lights of the city again. Her assistant had gone home and the office was finally quiet. She thought about Daniel's face in that hallway, nervous, sincere, honest. He really had changed since that night. She smiled faintly to herself. Maybe people could grow. Maybe he was learning to see beyond appearances. As the city outside faded into the soft blue of early dawn, both of them, miles apart, found themselves thinking the same silent thought. Maybe that night wasn't such a mistake after all. The days after that meeting felt like a blur for Daniel. Work continued as usual, but every time he tried to focus on his projects, his mind drifted back to Lila. Not the woman in the wheelchair he had met on a blind date, but the woman in the boardroom, the confident, composed, intelligent leader who had commanded the room with authority and calm. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had misjudged her. That dinner now seemed almost like a distant memory, one he had done poorly, yet it had somehow led to this moment. He felt a mix of guilt and awe. She had handled herself with such grace, and he realized that he had never seen anyone like her before. On Thursday morning, the company announced a sudden change. The client they had been pitching to, the one that had brought Lila into their office, requested a private one-on-one meeting with Daniel. It was unusual. Typically, the higher-ups handled such discussions. Daniel's stomach twisted with nerves. He wondered what she could possibly want from him. The meeting was scheduled for later that afternoon. Daniel paced his office, rehearsing what he would say, how he would act. He tried to calm his nerves by reviewing project notes and financial figures, but every number seemed meaningless. All he could think about was Lila's eyes, her composed expression, and the way she had smiled politely at him in the hallway. Finally, the time came. Daniel walked into the conference room trying to appear calm. Lila was already there, rolling gracefully to the head of the table. She looked different from that night at the restaurant, and even different from the boardroom meeting a few days ago. In this quiet, private setting, there was a subtle warmth in her eyes. She smiled as he entered. "Daniel," she said calmly, "thank you for meeting me." "Of course," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm happy to help in any way I can." Lila motioned to a chair across from her. "Please sit." Daniel sat down slowly, aware of every movement. He felt like a teenager again, nervous and unsure, except this time the stakes were far higher. He was no longer just worried about a blind date gone wrong. He was now facing someone whose judgment could impact his career. "I wanted to talk to you privately," Lila began, her voice calm and steady. "Not as a client, not as a CEO, but as someone who remembers you from a very different night." Daniel froze. His heart skipped. You remember me? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Of course, she said with a small smile. I remember dinner. I also remember the spilled water and your panicked reaction. It was memorable. Daniel's face turned red. He had expected her to forget, or at least to ignore that night entirely. But here she was, recalling every detail. His guilt returned in full force. I am so sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. I was nervous and I acted like an idiot. You didn't act like an idiot, she said softly. You were human. You were uncertain. You meant well. That's different from acting badly. He swallowed hard, trying to calm his racing thoughts. I still feel terrible about it. I've been thinking about that night constantly. I never wanted to offend you or make you feel different, Lila nodded slowly. Most people don't know how to handle differences. They freeze or they overcompensate. You did the latter, but I could see your intentions. Daniel looked at her, his mind racing. You're so composed, so confident. How do you manage to stay so calm? Lila's smile softened. I've had to learn. Life doesn't always go as planned. People judge before they understand. I've had to adapt to find strength in myself. Confidence comes from accepting who you are and expecting others to do the same. Daniel nodded, trying to absorb her words. It was like she was speaking not just to him, but to everyone who ever misjudged someone at first glance. He realized just how limited his own perspective had been that night. I didn't realize, he started slowly. I didn't realize how much strength it takes to do what you do every day. It's not about strength, Lila said. It's about choice. I could complain about what I've lost or focus on what I can do. Choosing the latter makes life possible, even rewarding. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought about life that way. He had spent so much time worrying about small inconveniences, about awkward moments, about appearances. Yet here was someone who had faced far greater challenges and still moved forward with dignity and purpose. Lila leaned forward slightly. Daniel, I'm not here to lecture you. I want you to understand something important. That night you saw me in a way that most people don't. Not perfectly, but you made an effort. That counts. Daniel's eyes widened. You're saying I actually did something right? Yes, she said, a soft laugh escaping her. Even in your nervousness, you tried to see me for who I am. Most people don't even make that attempt. For the first time in days, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't complete relief, but it was enough to let him breathe. He had worried so much about how he had failed her. Yet here she was, telling him that his small effort had meaning. They spent the next hour talking about more than business. Lila shared glimpses of her life, her work, her routines, and her experiences. She talked about how she had built her company from the ground up, facing obstacles that seemed impossible at times. She explained how an accident had left her paralyzed, but she refused to let it define her life. Daniel listened, amazed. He had assumed she was powerful because of her position, but now he realized it was more than that. It was her attitude, her resilience, and her ability to face reality without bitterness. You're incredible, he said quietly. I mean, I can't imagine how hard it must have been. It hasn't been easy, she admitted, but it's been worth it. Every challenge teaches something. Every mistake, every setback shapes you into who you are meant to be. Daniel nodded, feeling small but inspired. He thought about his own life, the petty complaints, the unnecessary worries, the fear of embarrassment. Compared to what Lila had faced, his anxieties seemed trivial. As the meeting ended, Lila gathered her documents and smiled at him. I think you're going to do well, Daniel. I can see potential in you if you learn to see beyond the surface, just as you tried to that night. Thank you, he said, his voice soft. That means more than I can say. She nodded politely and left the room, leaving Daniel sitting alone with a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He felt admiration, guilt, inspiration, and a strange sense of hope all at once. Later that evening, Daniel walked home slowly, thinking about everything Lila had said. He realized that the blind date, the spilled water, his nervous behavior, all of it, had led to this moment. What he had thought was a failure had been the beginning of understanding someone in a way he had never understood anyone before. He thought about her smile in the hallway, so calm, so forgiving. It was more than a polite gesture. It was a recognition of his effort, a subtle acknowledgement that he had begun to see her. For the first time, Daniel felt a real shift in himself. He wanted to be better, not just for her, but for everyone in his life. He wanted to be someone who could notice people for who they truly were, beyond appearances, beyond first impressions. Meanwhile, Lila returned home that evening, tired but content. She had meetings, emails, and calls, but Daniel's presence in her thoughts lingered. He had tried, and that effort mattered to her. Not everyone made the attempt. Not everyone saw her beyond her wheelchair. He had, in a small way, begun to understand. She smiled softly as she poured herself a cup of tea. Life had a strange way of surprising people. She had almost forgotten that awkward dinner, but now she realized it had set something in motion, something subtle but important. Someone had noticed her humanity before seeing her challenges, and that mattered. Daniel, sitting in his small apartment that night, opened a notebook and wrote a single line. See people. Really see them. He didn't fully understand what it meant yet, but he knew it was the lesson he had to carry forward. Both of them, in their separate worlds, had taken the first steps toward something neither had expected. Daniel had begun to truly see Lila, and in doing so he had begun to see himself differently as well. The revelation was simple, but profound. Life, as he realized, often demanded more than polite conversation or good intentions. It demanded effort, courage, and the willingness to see people for who they really were, not just what they seemed to be. And that was exactly what had begun to happen between them. The week passed slowly for Daniel. Every day at work he found himself thinking about Lila, the way she carried herself, the calmness in her eyes, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. Her presence at the office had been commanding, yet it left him feeling unexpectedly small, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him reflect on himself. He realized how much he had been distracted by his own insecurities, by worries that didn't matter. By Friday, Daniel knew he couldn't leave things as they were. He needed to apologize properly. Not a brief, awkward apology in passing, but a sincere one, face-to-face, that would convey exactly what he felt. He wanted Lila to know he had thought about that night constantly, about every clumsy word, every panicked gesture, every moment he had made her feel different. He wasn't sure how she would react. He knew she was polite, professional, and perfectly capable of handling uncomfortable situations. But he also knew that she had a sharp sense of judgment and that she deserved honesty, not excuses. He waited until the office was quieter, then sent her a short, polite message in, "Would you have a few minutes to meet? I'd like to speak with you privately." Within minutes, her reply came, "Of course. Come to my office." Daniel's heart pounded as he walked down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. He rehearsed his words in his mind, but knew that no matter how carefully he prepared, some of his nervousness would inevitably show. When he entered her office, Lila looked up from her paperwork and smiled faintly. "Daniel," she said, "please have a seat." He nodded, trying to calm the tremor in his hands. He sat down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint tapping of the city outside. "I wanted to speak with you about that night," Daniel began, his voice low. "The dinner. I handled it all wrong. I didn't know how to act, and I think I made you uncomfortable. I've thought about it every day since, and I realized I should have just, I don't know, treated you like a person, not like someone to worry about." Lila's eyes softened. She studied him carefully, not with judgment, but with a sense of quiet understanding. "I know, Daniel," she said. "I could see that you were trying. You didn't intend to make me uncomfortable, and that's important. It's easy for people to act carelessly when they don't understand, but you made an effort to see me." Daniel swallowed hard, relief and nervousness colliding in his chest. "Even so," he said quietly, "I feel like I owe you more than just words. I was embarrassed by how clumsy I was, and I know I left a bad impression. I want to make it right somehow." Lila's smile deepened slightly, gentle but firm. "Daniel, you can't erase the past. What matters is what you do moving forward. I appreciate your honesty, and that is already a step in the right direction. Most people never even try to acknowledge their mistakes." He nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had expected a lecture, perhaps a cold dismissal, maybe even a hint of disdain, but instead she was calm, accepting, and gracious. For the first time, he realized that her strength wasn't just in her work or her public image. It was in her ability to forgive, to see beyond small missteps, and to value sincerity. I just want you to know that I respect you," he said softly. "Not just for what you do, but for who you are. That night made me realize how unfair I've been in judging people, and especially you. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Lila leaned back slightly, her eyes meeting his. For a moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city. Then slowly she smiled, a genuine warm smile that made Daniel's chest tighten. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just for noticing my wheelchair or my accident, but for trying to understand me as a person. That is rare." Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Thank you for saying that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said. "It may seem small, but it matters. The effort to see someone fully is a gift, and you gave that gift." Daniel's heart swelled. He had come expecting judgment, or at least polite dismissal, but instead, he received something far more meaningful: recognition, understanding, and a connection that went deeper than words could fully capture. For a few moments, they simply sat there, the tension of past awkwardness fading into a quiet calm. Daniel realized he had never felt this way about anyone before. Not about a colleague, not about a friend, not even about a date. Lila's presence, her words, her genuine acknowledgement of his effort, had touched something inside him he hadn't known existed. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I feel like I've been given a second chance I don't deserve." "You don't need to say anything," Lila replied gently. "Just continue to be aware, to see people as they are, and to act with honesty and kindness. That's enough. That is already more than many people manage in a lifetime." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He thought about that dinner, the spilled water, his panicked movements, the awkward silences. And now he thought about her calm, forgiving smile, and he realized that his perspective had shifted completely. "You really make people think differently about themselves," he said softly. "I never imagined a single smile could mean so much." Lila chuckled lightly. "It's not about me. It's about the willingness to notice. Most people see differences first, and that blinds them to who someone truly is. You didn't. You tried to look beyond, even if clumsily. That effort matters far more than perfect execution." He felt a sense of humility wash over him. For the first time in his life, he understood the value of being truly present, of noticing people's humanity before their circumstances. He realized that all the awkwardness, all the mistakes, had brought him here, to a lesson in empathy he would never forget. The conversation shifted naturally then, from apologies to stories to laughter and quiet reflections. Lila spoke about her life, the challenges she had faced, the moments of fear and doubt, and how she had found ways to persevere. Daniel listened intently, realizing how much courage it took to navigate a world that often judged before understanding. As the afternoon light dimmed and the office grew quieter, Daniel felt a bond forming between them. It wasn't romantic yet, but it was a connection rooted in understanding, honesty, and mutual respect. He could see now that their blind date had not been a failure. It had been a beginning, a complicated, messy, awkward beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Finally, Lila stood and gathered her notes. "I have another meeting to attend," she said, her tone professional yet warm. "But I appreciate this conversation. It means more than you know." Daniel rose as well, unsure how to respond. I really do appreciate your patience and your words," he said. "I'll remember this." "You should," she said with a soft smile. "It's not every day someone apologizes with such honesty and intention." As he watched her leave, Daniel felt a quiet sense of transformation inside him. He had begun to understand that human connections weren't about perfection. They were about effort, empathy, and the courage to see someone fully. Later that evening, Daniel walked home slowly, replaying every word of their conversation. He thought about how differently things could have gone if he hadn't apologized, if he had let pride or fear keep him silent. He realized that small gestures, sincere words, quiet acknowledgement, a genuine smile, could change the course of a relationship even between two strangers. Meanwhile, Lila returned to her apartment, tired but calm. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about Daniel's sincerity, about the effort he had made to face his mistakes and learn from them. Most people never took responsibility for their missteps. Most people never tried to understand. But he had, and that had mattered to her more than she would ever admit aloud. She smiled softly, thinking about the future. It was possible, she realized, that someone like Daniel could truly learn to see others in a way that mattered. And that thought quietly brought her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, both of them lay awake in their respective homes, reflecting on what had happened. For Daniel, it was a lesson in humility and recognition. For Lila, it was a reminder that even small acts of honesty and courage could be noticed, appreciated, and returned. The apology had not only healed a moment of awkwardness, but had opened the door to something far more profound. They had both taken the first real step toward truly seeing each other, beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, beyond fear. And in that quiet understanding, something meaningful had begun. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Daniel and Lila slowly disappeared. What had started as a clumsy encounter between two strangers began to turn into a quiet friendship built on trust and respect. At first, their meetings were purely professional. They would discuss company plans, business proposals, and strategy updates. Lila always carried herself with calm confidence, and Daniel admired how she seemed to command every room without ever raising her voice. There was something about her that grounded everyone around her, a stillness that made people feel they didn't need to pretend. Daniel noticed small things about her, the way she adjusted her wheelchair slightly when she wanted to make a point, how her eyes lit up when someone shared a creative idea, and how she always listened more than she spoke. She had an incredible way of making people feel valued. But what surprised Daniel the most was how naturally he felt around her now. The awkwardness he once felt had completely vanished. He didn't see her wheelchair anymore. He saw her, a woman with intelligence, humor, and quiet courage. One afternoon after a long meeting, Lila looked at him and said, "You've changed." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Changed? How?" "You're calmer now," she said with a small smile. "You used to talk fast and fidget when you were nervous. Now you actually listen," he laughed softly. "That's because I'm learning from the best." Lila smiled, shaking her head slightly. "You're learning from yourself. You just needed to stop trying to be someone else." There was silence for a moment, a comfortable one, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. It was in those small, quiet moments that Daniel realized how much he enjoyed being around her. In the following weeks, they began having coffee together after work. Sometimes they'd sit by the cafe window and talk about ordinary things, life, family, or even childhood memories. Lila told him about her accident, how it had changed everything in an instant, how she'd spent months in the hospital thinking her life was over. But she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece. "I learned that I could still do everything I dreamed of," she said one day, stirring her coffee slowly. "Just differently. People told me I'd never live a normal life again. But the truth is, there's no such thing as normal. There's just life, and what we choose to make of it." Daniel listened quietly, deeply moved by her strength. "You make it sound easy," he said softly. "It wasn't," she replied. "But I stopped waiting for life to go back to what it was. Instead, I learned to create something new." That line stayed with Daniel long after she said it. He began to see life differently, not as a straight path, but as something that could be rebuilt, reshaped, and rediscovered. As time passed, Daniel and Lila started spending time together outside of work. Sometimes they went to small art galleries or quiet parks where they'd sit under trees and talk for hours. Daniel learned that she loved painting, though she rarely had time for it anymore. He encouraged her to start again. "You should," he said. "You light up when you talk about it." Lila smiled, the corners of her eyes softening. "Maybe I will." A few days later, Daniel brought her a set of paints and brushes as a surprise. She looked at the gift, speechless for a moment, then smiled, that same genuine, heartfelt smile that had first melted away the awkwardness between them. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." That evening, after he left, she sat by her window with the paints beside her. For the first time in years, she dipped a brush into color and began to paint. As the strokes formed on the canvas, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. Their friendship deepened naturally. They didn't rush it or define it. They simply enjoyed being in each other's presence. Daniel found himself looking forward to every conversation, every small moment they shared. And though he never said it aloud, he knew he was beginning to care for her, deeply. One evening during a company event, Lila gave a speech about resilience and gratitude. The room was silent as she spoke about seeing challenges not as limits but as lessons. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright. The world may see weakness in difference, she said, but strength often hides in the quiet places, in kindness, in patience, in understanding. Daniel stood at the back of the room, listening, his heart full. Every word she said felt like it carried a piece of truth he needed to hear. When she finished, the room erupted. An applause. But Daniel didn't clap immediately. He was too busy trying to swallow the lump in his throat. After the event, he found her outside, looking at the night sky. "That was beautiful," he said softly. She smiled. "Thank you. I just wanted people to see that life can still be whole even if it looks different." He nodded slowly. "You've done more than that. You've made me see people differently. You've made me see myself differently." She turned to look at him, her expression gentle. "Then maybe the night wasn't such a disaster after all," she said teasingly. Daniel laughed. "No, it wasn't. It just took me a while to realize it." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the cool breeze brushing against their faces. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy. It was calm, full of understanding. As time went on, their connection became something unspoken but deeply felt. Daniel never treated her differently, never acted out of pity, and that meant more to Lila than she could express. He made her laugh again, genuinely laugh, the kind that came from the heart. And she gave him something he hadn't known he was missing: purpose. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel stopped by her apartment with coffee. She was painting again, sunlight streaming through the windows, her hair catching the light. She looked up and smiled. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't wait," he admitted with a grin. "I wanted to see how the painting's coming along." She gestured toward the canvas. It was a landscape. Soft blue skies, calm waters, and a single figure sitting by a lake. "It's not finished yet," she said. "It's beautiful," Daniel said quietly. She glanced at him, then back at the painting. "You know, this was supposed to be a memory of peace. But maybe it's not a memory anymore. Maybe it's something new," Daniel smiled. "Something you built yourself." She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "With a little help." That moment lingered between them. Simple, warm, and real. Later, as he was leaving, Daniel turned at the door and said, "You once thanked me for seeing you. But I should be the one saying thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For teaching me what it really means to see someone," he said. "You've changed how I look at everything." Lila smiled, the same smile that had once been a quiet acknowledgement but now carried warmth, hope, and something deeper. "Then I guess we both helped each other," she said softly. In that smile, Daniel saw everything: forgiveness, strength, and quiet affection. He knew then that their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Over time, people around them noticed the closeness between them, the way they understood each other without words. They didn't rush to label what they had. It was something rare, born out of mistakes, patience, and the courage to see beyond the surface. Some evenings, when the city lights flickered outside her window, Lila would think about that first night. The awkward dinner, the spilled water, the uncomfortable silence. It all seemed so far away now, almost like it had happened to someone else. She smiled to herself, remembering Daniel's nervous face and how far they had both come since then. That blind date hadn't gone wrong at all. It had gone exactly as it was meant to. It just needed time to reveal its purpose. Because sometimes the best connections aren't the ones that begin perfectly. They're the ones that stumble, break a little, and then grow into something real. Something that teaches us how to see, how to forgive, and how to care. And on one quiet evening, as they sat together on her balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky, Lila looked at Daniel and said softly, "You know, that night I thought you'd never call me again." Daniel chuckled. "I thought the same thing about you," she smiled. "But you did, and I'm glad you did." He looked at her, the fading sunlight reflecting in her eyes. "Me too," he said. The sky slowly turned gold and pink, and in that gentle light, two people who had once misunderstood each other now shared a peace that words could never fully capture. Sometimes, Daniel thought, life doesn't go wrong. It just takes a different route to bring you exactly where you're meant to be. And as Lila smiled again, that same warm, thankful smile, he realized that no blind date, no awkward moment, and no misunderstanding had ever been wasted. It had all led here to a simple truth. Seeing someone, truly seeing them, can change everything.